I try to live my life without too many regrets. I've had highs and lows like everyone else, sure, but I do what I can to not worry too much about what could have happened if I'd made a different choice, if I maybe hadn't taken the road less traveled. I figure everyone makes the best decisions they can with the information they have available to them at the time. Going through all those what-ifs is ridiculous, because the only way you would have made a different choice is if you'd had some other detail, which of course you couldn't have. Hindsight is perfect, and even then, you can never be sure exactly what the sequence of events might have looked like if you'd gone to the right instead of the left. And yet, there is one choice I made, one road I took that I just can't help but wonder how things might have turned out if only I'd done something a little different. My job has me moving around pretty regularly. I'm not going to get into exactly what I do. That has no bearing on the story whatsoever. But a couple of years ago, I was working in Philadelphia and living on the other side of the Delaware River in Cherry Hill, New Jersey. I'm originally from northwestern Pennsylvania, and since this was the closest I'd been to home since I'd moved out of college, I took the chance to go and see my parents whenever I could. I knew I'd be moving again before long, and my folks weren't getting any younger, so I tried to find at least a weekend every month or so to make the 7-hour trip to visit them. If I'd been thinking about it when I was looking for places to rent, I'd have probably tried to live on the west side of Philadelphia instead of in Jersey, to avoid the traffic during rush hour. But by the time I realized it, the lease was signed already, and there wasn't much I could do about it. The drive to my hometown was pretty boring, honestly. I'd take the Ben Franklin Bridge across the river, head up I-476 for an hour or so, then a long slog across basically the entire expanse of Pennsylvania on I-80, before another hour north on I-79 to Erie, Pennsylvania, where I'm from. The only variance in the drive was how long it would take me to get through Philly, because once I got on the 476 extension, I could typically predict my ETA within 5 or 10 minutes. My second summer in Jersey, I'd taken 2 weeks off, and planned on spending the second week in Erie. Things changed that first Wednesday, though, because a big storm blew through and knocked out power in a good part of the area where I was living. Dealing with this 90-degree heat with no air conditioning wasn't something I particularly felt like spending the first half of my vacation doing, so after one uncomfortably sweaty night, I let my parents know I'd be heading over a few days early. In retrospect, I should have left first thing in the morning, but because I had a couple of things to take care of before heading out, by the time I finally got on the road that Thursday, it was past lunchtime and getting on towards mid-afternoon. For whatever reason, the traffic in Philly was particularly heavy, and by the time I got through town, I was a good hour behind schedule. Still, based on my normal timeline, I figured I'd be able to make it in early enough to grab a dinner and beer with my dad and brother before cashing in for the night. Two things I hadn't taken into consideration were the number of other folks that apparently had the same idea to get out of town that I did, and the road construction that must have sprung up in the time since my last trip home. The interstate highway system is a heck of a thing. Being able to zip along at 65, 70, or in some remote places like West Texas, even faster than that, makes cross-country automobile travel take a fraction of the hours it would otherwise. I can't tell you the number of times my folks have reminisced about the days before the interstate when going to see friends outside of DC. It would take almost twice as long as it does now. What's truly remarkable to me, though, is that even though the entire system of highways was built from start to finish in merely 35 years, it seems like when parts of it go under construction, they stay that way forever. Traffic was uncharacteristically heavy, but moving. I was still making decent time until I saw the first orange warning signs letting me know that our 4 lanes were reducing to 3, then 2, then 1. Hundreds of cones stretched down the road as far as the eye could see, and see I certainly could, as the cars in front of me had reached a complete and total standstill. It was one of the worst deadlocks I've ever been in. Seriously, I think I moved maybe a mile in an hour. After about 3 hours, my stomach started grumbling. With an exit just ahead and no end to the traffic jam in sight, I got off and found a diner to grab some dinner. Even if traffic miraculously picked up, I still had a solid 5 hours of driving ahead of me. So at that point, I knew for sure I was going to be very late when I was getting in. After finishing eating, I hopped back on the road. Things looked like they were picking up for a couple of miles, but then I came back up to the end of the jam and was right back there waiting. We were moving a little bit better, I think averaging about 5 miles an hour at this point, but as the sun started edging towards the horizon, I pulled out my phone and started to see if Google Maps could clue me in on some kind of workaround. That's the funny thing about human nature. Most of us just don't like to sit still. Studies at airports showed people would rather walk farther to baggage claim to get their luggage, even if the total time would have been less if they'd had a slightly longer wait plane-side. Well, thankfully the power of the internet appeared to be in my favor. Though I-80 still showed as a dark red band for another 50 miles or so, there was a southbound county road coming up in a few miles, and a northbound a couple after that, either of which looked like they let me bypass right by the worst of the traffic. Since I'd spent the better part of the day sitting on the road, my patience was just about worn out, and I opted to take the southbound road, even though the app told me it would ultimately take about 30 minutes longer to get to my parents' house. I just wanted to get moving again, and reasoned that at this rate, it might take me more than the 30-minute difference to get to the northbound route anyway, and that is a choice that will haunt me until the day I die. I made the turnoff, and immediately I felt my mood improve. The signs alternated limiting my speed between 35 and 40 miles an hour, but even that seemed like flying compared to the log jam I'd spent the last several hours in. The drive was interesting. The road started a little twisty, with plenty of elevation changes as it curved up and around the hills of central Pennsylvania. It took me on a general southwest diagonal, but turned and doubled back on itself enough that for the first 30 minutes or so, I got regular views of the stalled traffic on I-80. Pretty soon after that, though, just about the time that the sun was dipping down beneath a couple of the hills in my rearview mirror, the road took a long curving tack and carried me down and away out of sight of the interstate. Something that a lot of people don't realize is just how big a state Pennsylvania is. Sure, there are plenty of bigger ones, but Pennsylvania is deceptively big, and it is remote, isolated. Hell, the translation of the name means Penn's Woods after all. The Blair Witch Project didn't have to embellish that aspect of the state. The fact that you could head into the woods and walk for dozens of miles in any direction without seeing anything like another human being. It's got a decent number of big cities. Pittsburgh and Philly both have enough population to support major sports teams, but away from those centers of development, the Harrisburgs and the Pottsvilles and the Scrantons and what have you, there's just a whole lot of nothing. Nothing and trees, and a dark, lonely road. Such was the road I was traveling that night, wandering through the twists and turns of the Appalachian foothills. I've moved around a lot, I mentioned, traveled through most of the continental states anyway. I sometimes used to wonder, when I'd be driving along a patch of asphalt surrounded by only untamed wilderness, what it must have been like to be there constructing such a road. What had it been like before men had intruded with our civilization and our machines? What had lived there? I don't wonder anymore. Not since that night, when I went left instead of right. The way continued to twist back and forth, up and down. As I wound deeper into the foothills, the trees grew thicker, branches from either side of the road reaching over and almost touching, forming a natural canopy 20 feet up that blocked out much of my view of the sky and the stars above. I drove with my high beams on, because the idea of streetlights had never entered the minds of whoever built this road. The painted lines were extremely old and not well cared for, and I found myself gradually straddling the faded double yellow partition running down the middle of the two lanes to keep some distance between myself and the trees that increasingly encroached on the pavement's edge. I've never been a particularly good navigator. My parents used to say it was because I spent my childhood with my nose pushed into a book during car rides, but personally I think it's just because I'm bad at it. So, it was that despite there being no possible way I could get lost, as there were no other roads I could have possibly turned onto and gotten off track, that I more and more frequently found myself checking my phone to ensure I was on the right path, which is how I almost ran into the other car. My mind was wandering, thinking about the fact that my signal bars had dropped and remained at 0 for the last 20 minutes, and what possible implications that could mean if I should have some kind of emergency. I raised my eyes back to the road, after Google Maps confirmed for probably the 20th time I was still on a good route. After my brain took a beat to process that what I was rapidly approaching was a vehicle stopped in the middle of the lane, I slammed my foot on the brake. I stopped just in time, but not by much, with maybe 5 feet separating my hood from the other car's rear bumper. My heart was pounding in my chest as adrenaline coursed through my body, but my fear quickly gave way to anger. Seriously, what the hell is this guy doing? Not only was he stopped in the middle of the road, but all of his lights were off. If I hadn't had my high beams on, there was no chance I would have seen him before I was practically on top of him, even if I hadn't been checking my phone. I could feel my pulse beating in the vein on the side of my neck. I'm not somebody particularly quick to road rage, and after a couple of quick breaths, I managed to get a hold of myself. Not wanting to outright alarm anyone that might still be in the vehicle, I shifted into reverse and backed out about 20 feet, popping my hazards on. But that's when I started noticing a few odd things about this stopped car, more than just the fact the lights were out. Of course, it was halted directly in the middle of the road, but that wasn't unreasonable since there wasn't any shoulder to speak of that the driver could have moved it over to. The strange thing, though, was that all of the doors were wide open, those on the driver's side even crossing over slightly into the oncoming lane, and on further observation, I saw an item dropped on the road by the rear driver's side door, something that appeared to be a child's stuffed animal. I considered my options and after a few moments, decided I would have to go against my better judgment to just keep on my merry way and head outside to get a better idea of just what was happening here. I said earlier my job doesn't have anything to do with this story, which is mostly true, but before you judge my decisions too harshly, it bears mentioning I've spent some time in the military. An obligation to help people has been drilled into me over the years, and I've seen enough things while deployed to feel I could handle myself. And so, I got out of my car but kept it running. I popped the trunk to grab the flashlight I kept there and left my headlights on so I could see what I was doing. I looked up and down the road, hoping to spy signs of other cars approaching, but no such luck. "Hello?" I called out to the other car as I cautiously started my approach, circling around to the left towards the middle of the road, so I'd be able to get a look inside before I got too close. Is anyone there?" No answer. The beams from my headlights helped some, but there were enough shadows to still obscure the car's interior. Shining my flashlight, though, easily determined that no one was inside. I moved closer, stooping down by the rear door to pick up the fallen object off the ground. It was a child's toy, just as I had suspected. A stuffed rabbit with well-worn patches showing signs of frequent love. I frowned. If the folks traveling in the car had hitched a ride with a passerby, they would have taken this sort of thing with them, or the child would have thrown a conniption. I shut the rear door and moved up to the front, put my hand on the hood and found it was still warm to the touch. That meant it couldn't have been here terribly long. I slid into the driver's seat to try and figure out if there was some kind of mechanical issue that could have forced the car to stop, and I was startled to find a set of keys still dangling from the ignition. Pressing the brake, I turned the key, and the engine started right up, headlights and the dome light on the roof springing to life. Fuel, oil, temperature, battery, all the gauges looked good, not even a check engine light. And curiouser. Then I saw the purse on the passenger seat. I picked it up, a normal brown shoulder bag, and briefly rummaged around before finding a wallet inside. Everything appeared to be intact. About $40 in cash, a couple of credit cards, gym membership, Sam's Club card. The driver's license named the owner as Mary Walker, a pretty blonde that had just turned 30 the month before. A couple of pictures showed Mary in stage poses sitting on a blanket under a tree, whose leaves were turned red and yellow, captured in the thrall of autumn. A huge bearded lumberjack of a man hugged her from behind, a small ponytailed girl with a goofy, over-exaggerated smile on her lap. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up, a shiver running down the base of my spine. Something was extremely wrong with this situation. I put everything back in the purse and returned to the seat, turned off the car and got out, shutting the driver's side door behind me. I pulled my phone out and called 911, holding it over my head to try and get a connection with no luck. Cursing softly, I jammed the red end call button and moved around to the passenger side of the car. I played my flashlight around and noticed that some of the foliage at the edge of the road was bent and trampled, like someone had walked through it. I didn't have enough woodcraft to be able to judge how long ago they might have passed, but even then, I couldn't imagine any scenario for why someone would have gone wandering here. Shining my light off into the woods, the beam extended only maybe 30 feet through the trees before being effectively swallowed by greedy blackness. I looked at the flattened foliage, at the stuffed rabbit in my hand, and then at the dark trees crowding maliciously. My thoughts teetered back and forth between just what I should do. I made up my mind. I'd been trained to help people. It was hardwired into my system, and there was a child somewhere in these woods. I raised my foot to take a step on to the beaten path, and that's when a white flicker of movement entered the very edge of my flashlight beam. It was Mary Walker. She was naked and walking stiffly, unnaturally, her arms swaying out of sync with the rest of her body, like a marionette manipulated by an inexperienced puppeteer.
"Hello?"
Her voice called out.
"Anyone there?"
More shapes stumbled into view behind her, shambling along. Here, the bearded man who must be Mary's husband, and there her little daughter, owner of the well-loved rabbit, both naked, moving as oddly as their wife and mother. And now I could tell that there were more, many more, their forms indistinct out of the direct light, but so many, they caused the darkness to pitch and swell with their odd, staggering passage, their voices a chorus.
"Hello?"
they called.
"Anyone there?"
Parroting back the questions I'd asked only a few short minutes ago when I'd approached the abandoned car. I took a stumbling step back, away from the woods and approaching automatons, tripping into the walker's car. Catching my balance, I involuntarily shone my light into the pitch recesses of the branches, and in doing so, I could just make out barely a sort of darkness, crouched hidden in the upper limits, a void even darker than the trees themselves. Was it my imagination? Those lines of pure blackness that extended from that concealed mass and seemed to pierce the flesh of Mary Walker, her skin, and the countless other shapes moving in concert with them.
"Hello? Anyone there?"
I sprinted then, back to my car, engine mercifully still running, headlights and hazards flashing welcomingly.
"Hello?"
I shifted to reverse, miraculously keeping enough of my head to avoid running off the road as I completed a swift three-point turn.
"Anyone there?"
I chanced to glance in my rearview mirror. The pale form of Mary Walker stood halted just at the edge of the forest where the trees met the road. One hand was raised, beckoning me to return, or perhaps waving goodbye, her face a mask of confused sadness. I pressed the gas and drove back the way I came. I never looked back again. The rest of the trip was a fog. At some point after I made it back to the interstate, I called my parents and let them know I wouldn't be getting in until extremely late. I drove on autopilot, the traffic jam having cleared while I was off. I thought about calling 911, but I didn't. What would I have told them, and to what end? There was no one left to be helped. I try not to go through life with too many regrets, wondering about what-ifs. But this one, this choice, what if I had left earlier in the day? What if I hadn't stopped for dinner? Maybe I would have still gone left. Maybe I would have been there in time to help the walkers. Maybe I would have been taken by that black thing fishing in the dark. What if I had gone right? Would I still be ignorantly going through life? Would I still be ignorantly going through life, unknowing that there are such things out there? I try not to think of it too often, but every now and then, my thoughts turn to the stuffed rabbit. It wasn't until I reached my parents' house that night that I realized I'd still clutched it in my hand. I used to wonder, before men brought our roads and civilization, what the wilderness was like. What lived there? I don't wonder anymore. I can't afford to. at least if I don't want to wake up screaming. And no matter how bad the traffic is, I always stick to the interstate. What is up, guys? Blue Spooky here as always. I got an unfortunate announcement for you guys tonight. You might have noticed that a lot of my videos have been deleted or put onto the unlisted category. That's because I just recently got 2 copyright strikes all at once, so if I get one more, my channel will be deleted, so I can't really do much about that except for remove everything, I guess. Just hope that somebody just doesn't decide to strike me and delete my entire channel. So from now on, I might be posting a little less often, or at least not posting Reddit stories or the Let's Not Meet as often. If I can get permission for the stories and make sure they're not gonna go crazy on me, then yeah, sure, I'll do some videos, but other than that, I don't really want to risk it right now. I can't until April or all my stuff will get deleted. If you guys want to help me out for a couple of months and send in your stories, it doesn't really matter how long they are, as long as they're, grammatically correct and everything and are easy to read. I'll go ahead and read those, and we'll try to make it by on that if you guys are up for it. If you guys decide to send in a story for me, please be sure to include in the tagline how you would like the story to be named, how you would like to be credited in the description of the video the story appears in, and the category of the story if it has one. Links to all my social media will be in the description below, including my Facebook, Twitter, and Gmail accounts. I also have a link to my second channel, which I will put in there, that I just made, just in case this one gets destroyed. You guys can go subscribe there, and we'll do some stuff like web novel readings, and maybe continue the scary story stuff if this one does get deleted. Other than that, please be sure to let me know in the comments what you guys think. Please be sure to leave any feedback, like, share, subscribe if you feel so inclined. Those really help me out. They promote me on the YouTube algorithm, especially since I've had to delete so many videos. Please be sure you click that bell as well, because I could really use all the support I can get right now. If you guys are curious about the music or the art used in the video, that's listed in the description as always. And I hope you guys have a good day. That's all for now, I think.